Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Medeiros. I'm the Director of Facilities here at High Point. Today we're going to go over fire and safety training as well as active shooter. Okay, questions. Who is your fire and safety coordinator? Those of you who are going to be reporting to residential sites, it's going to be your maintenance supervisor who will be your safety coordinator. They're the person that you can report safety issues or ask questions of. People who are at outpatient sites or possibly some COA sites, it'll probably be the program director. So when you guys get to your respective sites and you have questions about what to do in the event of a fire, those are the people you want to ask. So after you get through your training here at the hospital, you'll all go through a site-specific training. And they should be going over things like, fire safety, locations of extinguishers, evacuation routes. If they don't, tell them I said they have to. You also go through an annual fire safety training as well as anti-violence and active shooter while you're employed at High Point. Evacuation, again, in the event of a fire or another disaster, you may be asked to evacuate the facility. You're going to want to know where your meeting place is and familiarize yourself with that beforehand. The last thing you want to do in a fire or an emergency is be wandering around looking for where you're supposed to be. We're not allowed to smoke during an evacuation. Make sure you familiarize yourself with where the sign-in log is going to be. It's important because we want to know that we have all the staff. Because if we don't have all the staff, we're probably going to tell the firefighters that and they're going to go in and look for you. So if you're outside the building safe, possibly putting firefighters' lives in jeopardy. Who notifies staff to re-enter the building? It'll be the firefighters, police, whichever authority having jurisdiction responds. And then program director or safety coordinator will complete the environmental and/or safety report in the event of an evacuation. Can you or others exit safely downstairs? It's kind of your only option. Elevators will lock themselves out on a specific floor if the fire alarm goes off. So you have to take the stairs. When would we evacuate? Again, in a fire or other emergency. We covered a lot of this already. Evacuation routes, when you get to your sites, all our buildings have evacuation routes posted. Familiarize yourself with them because they'll give you two different options. Again, if the fire's in your main evacuation route, you want to know how to get out a secondary route. And then who checks offices, restrooms, conference areas? So it's all staff really, but RSs and MHSs are primarily responsible for checking the rooms. I know a lot of buildings they'll check the room and then they'll take the trash can and put it outside the door to show that it's been checked. But again, familiarize yourself with the way that your specific programs do it. All right, so we use a number of codes here at High Point. Red is for fire, blue is for medical, green, a show of support, and that means if a patient gets agitated or there's violence on the floor. That's what a code green is. Yellow would be a bomb threat. Dr. Gray would be a hostage situation, and Alice is an active shooter. Okay. Who here is familiar with the fire triangle? Anybody? Bueller? No? So fire needs three things to exist. heat, oxygen, and fuel. When you take away any one of those things, the fire extinguishes. And that's how our fire extinguishers work. It contains a very fine powder. Put it on the fire, it actually stops air from being able to get to the fire, and that's how it puts it out. Again, familiarize yourself with the location of fire extinguishers when you get to your facilities. Has anybody here ever had to use a fire extinguisher? Yeah. So, as this gentleman knows, if you need to use a fire extinguisher, it's a pretty panicky situation. So we use the PASS acronym to try to help you remember how to use a fire extinguisher. P, pull the pin. A, aim the nozzle at the base of the fire. S, squeeze the trigger. S, sweep from side to side. Once the extinguisher is empty, lay it out of the way. You'll get about 15 seconds out of most extinguishers. Don't try to smother a fire. Why shouldn't we do that? Come on, I let you off in the last one. Somebody's got to answer. Yes?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm right. Can it like make it worse? Can it spread?
Exactly. You can actually spread the fire. Because if you're, say you have a fire and you're taking a blanket and hitting the blanket, or hitting the fire with the blanket, what else are you doing?
You giving it oxygen?
You're pushing oxygen into the fuel, so you can actually spread the fire. Don't use an extinguisher on a ceiling fire, as the contents may fall on the user, resulting in injury. I can speak to this from experience. It won't result in injury, but one of the main ingredients in that fire extinguisher is ammonia, and it'll give you the worst case of bronchitis you've ever had for about 6 weeks. So before we get into the different types of fires, as you can see, they're rated A, B, C, and so on. All our fire extinguishers, with the exception of the kitchen, are ABC extinguishers, which means you don't have to worry about figuring out what type of fire you're fighting. You just grab the extinguisher and use it. The exception being the kitchen, which has K extinguishers, which are specific for grease. So the classes of fire are A, paper, wood, common combustibles. B, flammable gases and liquids. C, electrical. D, combustible metals. You'll never have to worry about a D-type fire in any of our facilities. Those are things like magnesium, which, if there's ever a magnesium fire in the facility, God help you. Class K is kitchen grease, and you'll see those. They're the larger units. They're all silver. Is anybody working in the kitchen here? No. So none of you may ever see them. Okay, again, never use an elevator or try to use an elevator to evacuate, because the elevator is going to take you where it wants to go, not you where you want to go. Be sure doors are cool before opening. Why do we do that?
Because if a doorknob is hot, it usually means there's a fire on the other side.
Exactly. Smoke is actually the leading cause of death in a fire, asphyxiation. So if you're moving around the facility trying to get out, stay low to the ground. If possible, put a wet rag over your face. Now, I expect full participation on this one. What do you do if your clothes catch fire?
Stop, rock, and roll.
Very good. All right, sprinklers and fire extinguishers, and actually all the fire safety components we have in this facility are meant to give you guys time to get out. If we can save portions of the building, that's great. That's not really what they're meant for. They're meant to give time to evacuate, or to give time for firefighters to get into the building to do rescue. Smoking is a leading cause of fire, so in your travels, if you are a smoker, please be diligent with extinguishing your smoking materials. If you're not, please be diligent with employees and their smoking materials. Keep your work areas clean. Not only is a cluttered area more likely to cause fire, but it's also likely to impede evacuation. Pay attention to electricity. I guess if there's some live wires hanging out, you should probably tell somebody. Don't overload circuits with extensions. So we're not allowed to use extension cords anyways in a permanent function. If you're a member of maintenance and you're using an extension cord with a hand drill, that's one thing. It's not a permanent function. But the more important thing is don't overload circuits with power strips. You know, try not to have 10 things plugged into one outlet, because that can actually cause a fire. It overloads the lines and actually can heat them up. Make sure equipment is in good order. If you see something that doesn't look right, let maintenance know or your supervisor. And watch for overheating equipment. Use only company approved appliances. So you guys have the ability to bring in small items. They do have to be inspected by maintenance before you can use them. Only company approved decorations. I would personally prefer no decorations, but there is a policy on decorations if you absolutely have to decorate for St. Patrick's Day. No hot plates or mug warmers. Check your office at the end of the day. Make sure what should be off is off. Everything looks good. Know your evacuation plan. Know the 2 escape routes. Keep routes uncluttered. If you see storage in hallways or stairwells or by doors, you know, take it upon yourself to move it. There shouldn't be any storage in hallways. And if you don't feel right moving it, let somebody know. The best way to fight a fire is to prevent it. Look for possible ignition sources and report any dangerous situations. Again, feel free to tell your supervisor, maintenance supervisor, anybody you can get your hands on if something doesn't look right. Smoke in designated areas only. Again, know your evacuation routes. If there's a fire, sound the alarm and evacuate. Is anybody here familiar with RACE? Yes? Do you want to tell us? Very good. So just like PASS, we have an acronym that we use called RACE. And it's just a simple acronym to try to help you in a panic situation. So you want to rescue or remove, get any patients out of the area of the fire, alarm, pull the fire alarm, contain. So we want to contain the fire. Why?
Because you don't want it to spread other places.
Yeah, you don't want it to spread. And also you want to limit its oxygen too. So you want to do things like close windows and doors, because eventually that fire will burn itself out. It will use up all the oxygen. And then evacuate, which is fairly obvious, get out of the building. Okay, so on to the active shooter training. Is anybody here familiar with active shooter or the concept? Yeah.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we have to prepare for things like this nowadays. An active shooter is an armed person coming onto the property with the intent to kill. So High Point has adopted a run, hide, fight policy for this. They used to teach shelter in place. Basically, get under your desk, get under your table, and wait for police. That system was actually developed in the 80s in LA for drive-by shootings by gang members. And it worked for them because the gang members weren't trying to come in the building, they were trying to shoot each other outside. You just wanted to avoid getting hit by a stray bullet. Nowadays, we have people actively entering buildings and looking for targets. That system doesn't work anymore. Certainly didn't work in Columbine. I believe there was 47, if I'm correct, people in the library in Columbine. The students were adamant on trying to get out the back fire exit, which led into a field, I believe. The teachers wouldn't let them. They insisted on using that training of shelter in place, and everybody in the library died. And all of those people could have gone out the back door, and at least some of them would have lived. So that's why we use a run, hide, fight model now. So the first thing you want to do is run. Again, have an escape route in your head. If the escape route's wrong, go the other direction of the noise, basically. Direct clients and patients to exit and muster points. Depending on where your muster point is, you may or may not use it. You may just want to, your best bet may just be to keep going. Leave your belongings behind. Don't worry about calling the police. If it's at that point, somebody's already been alerted. The other thing I like to tell people is, hit a fire alarm on your way out if you can. When exiting, keep your hands visible for authorities. A lot of times these active shooters are dressed fairly normally, and authorities may have a hard time distinguishing you from them. So you really want to make sure that they understand that you're not a threat. When exiting, try to bring as many people with you, but if they're adamant and they refuse, you have to leave them. Meet at the nearest muster point detailed in the attached drawing for your site. If your site is not listed, specific muster points should be established with the area safety coordinator and program director. Again, that'll be done during your site specific. If running is not an option, the second thing to do is to hide. So if we hear the shooter, we're all in this room during orientation, and we hear the shooter coming down the hallway, it's probably not going to be a great idea to try and run because we know he's in that hallway. So we could close this door and do our best to hide. Turn off lights, turn off cell phones, barricade the door. There's cabinets, there's tables. We could do our best to keep that door from being able to be opened. And then a last resort is to fight. So say somebody sneezes and he hears us and he gets through the barricade. Your next option is to make yourself a difficult target. These people are typically looking for easy targets. They're looking for people who lay down and give up. You can throw things at the shooter's face, scream, just in general, move around, make yourself a difficult target in the hopes that he'll move on because you're too much trouble. So in your handouts, you should all have the emergency management training. You don't need to look for it now. Go ahead and review that after the orientation. Okay, so electrical cords, again, we're not allowed extension cords unless you're using them in a temporary manner. Don't lay them where people walk if you do use them. Don't stretch them across the corridor. Certainly don't tape them down because that implies that we're using them in a permanent manner. Poor lighting is a major housekeeping problem. Causes difficult to spot hazards. And again, report this to whomever you report it to. Supervisors, all supervisors have access to our work order system. Your supervisor may decide that you need access as well. If they don't, report it to them and they can put in a digital work order that your maintenance people will get. Badges should be worn visible at all times, and you're probably going to want to do that anyways because most of the buildings you can't get anywhere without your badge. Smoking in designated areas only. Avoid wet areas. If you see a puddle in the hallway, grab a wet floor sign. Safety is everybody's responsibility. You may not have the tools to clean it up, but you can certainly mark it and let somebody know that it's there. We spoke about egress a little while ago, so again, clutter, you know, not only is it unsightly, but it can slow you down in evacuation, you know. Those, the pile of chairs in the hallway that you thought were no big deal suddenly turn into a big deal when they've fallen down across the hallway in the event of a fire. You guys shouldn't be using tools at all, so I'm gonna skip most of this. Is anybody familiar with lockout tagout? No? So lockout tagout is an OSHA initiative. And it's really about certain pieces of equipment have what's called a capacitor, which stores large amounts of energy. So even when that piece of equipment is disconnected from electricity, it still has the potential to be activated. And if somebody were to be working on a piece of equipment like that, and you unknowingly tried to activate it, there's the potential that you could cause them serious harm. So lockout tagout, it's basically a red tag. If you ever see one, it just means don't try to activate that equipment. Somebody's working on it somewhere. Biohazards, you know, anything involving blood is a biohazard. Be sure to handle it carefully using, you know, universal precautions, particularly with sharps. Make sure they go in sharps containers. And again, storage, keeping areas uncluttered, and handling equipment, you know, proper lifting techniques, lift with your legs, not with your back. Is anybody familiar with the right to know, or SDS? Yeah? So SDS is safety data sheets, and it's basically a program to compile all the chemicals, hazardous chemicals in the facility, so that if you were to say, get something in your eyes, you can look up that chemical and it'll tell you exactly what to do until somebody gets there to help you. A good example is WD-40. If you ingest it, a lot of people's, you know, common response would be to make yourself throw up, but it actually states that's the last thing you want to do because you get it into your lungs and aspirate. So it's important to know where those are in your facility. Again, ask when you get to your facility where the SDS book is located. And this just talks more about it. And this is a breakdown of an actual SDS. I believe you guys have one in your handouts. But the important parts are personal protective information that tells you what kind of equipment you need to wear while you're using that chemical, and the health hazards. So those are the two big ones that, because it's a government program, these sheets are difficult to read, so it's important to kind of familiarize yourself with where to look. Okay, we went over that. And that's the end of the slideshow. I am going to start you guys with a active shooter video. So maybe Jessica's gonna get you guys started with the active shooter video. Look forward to working with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.